The crisp morning air carried a quiet hum through the airport, passengers weaving through the bustling terminal, lost in their own worlds. Patricia Taylor adjusted the strap of her old canvas handbag, her fingers tightening around the handle. At 76, she had learned to carry herself with quiet grace, despite the years that had left their marks, wrinkles that told stories, eyes that had seen too much, and a heart that still found joy in the smallest moments. She handed her ticket to the flight attendant at the entrance of the first-class cabin, her voice soft yet hopeful. "I called ahead. They said I might be able to get an upgrade if there was space." Jessica, the young blonde attendant, barely looked at the ticket before her lips curled into a smirk. "I'm sorry, ma'am, but first class isn't for economy passengers." The words landed like a slap, sharp and dismissive. A few nearby passengers turned to watch, their expressions ranging from amused to indifferent. A man in an expensive suit twirled a glass of red wine between his fingers, whispering something to the woman beside him, who let out a quiet chuckle. Patricia swallowed, forcing a small smile. "I understand, but I—" Jessica let out a dramatic sigh, cutting her off. "Look, we don't give out free upgrades just because someone hopes for it. If you don't have a first-class ticket, please move along." The murmurs grew louder. A girl in her 20s, dark-haired, with a phone in hand, frowned. "That's kind of harsh," she whispered to her friend. "She's just an old woman. It wouldn't kill them to be nice." But Patricia heard only the laughter, the judgment, the weight of being made to feel small in a place where she had every right to exist. With a resigned nod, she turned away, clutching her handbag tighter. Then, just as she took a step toward the economy section, a voice, calm, steady, and laced with authority, cut through the noise. "Hold on a second." A man in his 50s stepped forward, his suit crisp, his eyes sharp with disapproval. The murmurs quieted as he looked at Jessica, then at Patricia. "She's elderly, and clearly not well. I see empty seats here. Are you really going to deny her a little comfort?" Jessica crossed her arms. "Rules are rules. If you care so much, why don't you give up your seat?" His jaw tightened. "It's not about rules. It's about basic human decency." But Patricia, her voice barely above a whisper, said, "I don't want to cause trouble. I'll manage." She turned to leave, and at that exact moment, someone else stepped into the first-class cabin. No one noticed at first, the man in the worn denim jacket, baseball cap pulled low, moving quietly through the aisle. He hadn't planned to be seen. But then his eyes landed on Patricia, and the moment he realized what was happening, the air around him shifted. A single gasp rippled through the cabin, because the man standing there was Keanu Reeves. Jessica's fingers tightened around the clipboard as the whispers spread like wildfire through the cabin. The suited man who had mocked Patricia just moments ago nearly choked on his wine. The blonde beside him clutched his arm, eyes wide in disbelief. The girl with the phone gasped, her fingers already moving, recording everything. Keanu Reeves took another step forward, pulling off his cap, revealing his unmistakable face. His dark eyes swept the cabin, calm, yet carrying an edge of something sharp, something dangerous. "What did you just say to my mother?" His voice wasn't raised, but the weight in it was enough to crush the air out of the room. Jessica's face turned ghostly pale. I didn't know she was your—" "That shouldn't matter." His gaze didn't waver. "She's a passenger," she was polite, "and there are empty seats." Patricia's eyes, wide with shock, flickered between her son and the flight attendant. "Keanu? You're on this flight?" Her voice was a whisper, as if she still wasn't sure she was seeing him. Keanu softened when he looked at her. "I should be asking you that, Mom." Then his eyes snapped back to Jessica. "Why isn't she sitting in first class?" Jessica stumbled over her words. "Sir, it's policy. We don't upgrade passengers for free." Keanu took another step forward, his presence filling the cabin. "You mean my policy?" His voice was still quiet, but something in it made the blood drain from Jessica's face. "Because, as far as I know, I own this airline." The entire cabin held its breath. A collective realization dawned like an oncoming storm. Keanu Reeves wasn't just a passenger, he was the owner. The man in the suit with the wine, Victor Marshall, a high-profile investor who thrived on control, scoffed, breaking the silence. "Oh, come on," he muttered, rising from his seat. His voice was thick with irritation, his face red from embarrassment. "This is ridiculous. We paid for first class, not for some celebrity stunt." He waved a dismissive hand at Patricia. "You think you can just shove your mother in here because you have money?" Keanu turned slowly, his eyes narrowing. "You paid for a seat, not a license to disrespect my mother." Victor's jaw clenched. "You?" "I'll tell you what," Keanu cut him off, his tone unreadable. "I'll refund your ticket. Double." His expression remained calm, but the challenge in his voice was unmistakable. "Feel free to take it and leave." The entire cabin was frozen, eyes darting between Keanu and Victor. The girl filming whispered to her friend, "Oh my God, this is insane." Victor scoffed, but the hesitation in his stance betrayed him. He glanced at the other passengers, his pride clashing with his ego. Keanu just stood there, waiting, daring him to take the offer. The tension crackled in the air. Jessica's hands trembled around her clipboard. Victor clenched his fists. Patricia, still reeling, looked like she wanted to speak but couldn't find the words. Then, finally, Victor exhaled sharply, shaking his head. "Forget it." He dropped back into his seat, jaw tight. Keanu didn't smile. He didn't gloat. He simply turned back to Jessica and said, "Mom will be sitting here." Without waiting for an answer, he gently guided Patricia into the nearest first-class seat, his movements calm but firm. The murmurs started up again, but this time they were different. Respect, admiration, shock. But as Patricia settled into her seat, her fingers still shaking slightly from the overwhelming moment, something changed in the air. Because Victor's face wasn't just red from anger anymore. It was red from something deeper, something boiling just beneath the surface. And he wasn't done yet. The plane hummed with quiet tension, but beneath the surface something dangerous brewed. Victor's eyes burned with resentment, his fingers tapping impatiently against the armrest. Jessica, still visibly shaken, stood frozen, unsure whether to apologize or disappear. Patricia, adjusting to the sudden turn of events, reached for Keanu's hand. "Son, you didn't have to do all this. I was fine." Keanu turned to her, his grip firm but reassuring. "Mom, you shouldn't have to be fine with being disrespected." His voice softened. "Not here, not anywhere." The girl with the phone, Lily, kept recording, whispering to her friend, "This is going viral fast." The words were barely out of her mouth before her screen lit up with comments flooding in real time. Victor shifted in his seat, his jaw twitching. His humiliation still clung to him like a stain he couldn't wash off. He was a man used to power, used to control. And Keanu had stripped that from him in front of an entire cabin of witnesses. He wasn't about to let that go. With a slow inhale, Victor leaned forward, his voice dropping to a sharp whisper. "You think you can buy your way through everything, don't you?" Keanu barely glanced at him. "No." He adjusted his mother's seatbelt, his tone neutral. "But I know money doesn't buy class." The words landed like a slap. Victor's knuckles went white. "I've been a VIP member of this airline since before you even owned it, pal," Victor continued, his voice just loud enough for the nearby passengers to hear. "I helped fund this company. You think that means nothing?" Keanu exhaled, finally looking at him. "It means you should know better." Victor let out a cold chuckle. "You think you're some kind of hero, don't you? A movie star playing savior." He leaned in slightly, lowering his voice. "Let me tell you something, Reeves. This isn't one of your scripts. This is real life. And in real life, money and power win." Keanu studied him for a long moment. Then, with the faintest hint of a smirk, he replied, Guests were in different realities then. The tension between them stretched tight. An invisible line neither wanted to cross, but both were ready to push. Other passengers pretended not to watch, but their silence was too heavy, too expectant. Then, suddenly, a violent jolt rocked the plane. Gasps rippled through the cabin as overhead bins rattled, a few passengers gripping their seats. The seatbelt sign flickered on, followed by the captain's calm but urgent voice over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, we've hit unexpected turbulence due to a storm system. Please remain seated with your seatbelts fastened." The plane steadied, but the atmosphere remained charged. A few murmurs of unease trickled through first class. But Victor, he just sat there, a slow smirk creeping back onto his face. Jessica, still rattled from Keanu's confrontation, straightened her posture, clutching the clipboard like a lifeline. She turned toward the cockpit, likely looking for guidance, but before she could take a step, Victor reached out and grabbed her wrist. She startled, eyes wide. "Sir?" Victor leaned in, speaking low enough that only she and Keanu could hear. "You want to keep your job, sweetheart?" His grip tightened just slightly. "Then do something useful. That man just undermined your authority in front of everyone, and you're going to let that slide?" Jessica hesitated, her lips parting, but no words came out. Victor's voice dropped even lower, his eyes gleaming. "Or do you think Pacific Wings keeps employees who embarrass themselves on camera?" His head tilted toward Lily, still recording quietly. A flicker of panic crossed Jessica's face. She knew what he was implying, and Keanu saw it too. His voice, calm, but edged with warning, cut through the thick silence. "I'd think very carefully before making a decision you'll regret." Jessica's breath hitched. Her grip on the clipboard tightened. Victor leaned back, satisfied. For now, but Keanu could see it in his eyes. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. The plane moved through the turbulent sky, but inside the first-class cabin, the real storm was brewing. Patricia adjusted in her seat, sensing the thickening tension, but choosing to remain quiet. Keanu, however, saw everything: Victor's manipulations, Jessica's hesitation, and the way fear flickered across her face like a candle in the wind. Jessica's grip on her clipboard was tight, her knuckles white. She didn't move, didn't speak. But the battle behind her eyes was clear. She was caught between self-preservation and conscience, between siding with the man who held power over her career and the man who had just exposed her actions to the world. Victor leaned back in his seat, his smirk returning, as if he had already won. His fingers tapped against the armrest, a slow, deliberate rhythm. He glanced at Keanu, his expression dripping with amusement. "You know what your problem is, Reeves," he murmured, just loud enough for Keanu to hear. "You think everyone in the world is playing by your rules." He chuckled, shaking his head. "That's not how things work. You don't get to walk in here and rewrite reality just because you're some Hollywood saint." Keanu didn't react. He simply stared at Victor, unreadable. Victor smirked. "You might own this airline, but people like me, we run the world." Jessica swallowed hard, her fingers twitched, and then, with a shaky breath, she turned toward Keanu. "Sir," she said, trying to keep her voice steady, "I need to ask you to—" Before she could finish, another sharp jolt rocked the plane. This time it was harder. The lights flickered. A few gasps rippled through the cabin. The intercom crackled, the captain's voice cutting in. "Folks, we're encountering unexpected turbulence. We need everyone to remain seated and keep their seat belts fastened." The plane dipped slightly before steadying again. A woman in the back of first class let out a nervous whimper. The blonde passenger beside Victor gripped her armrest a little tighter. But Victor? Victor just grinned, like he was enjoying this. Lily's phone camera was still rolling, catching every detail. The tension, the whispers, the power struggle that had unfolded before her eyes. Her fingers danced across the screen, typing out a caption before hitting post. "Keanu Reeves shuts down arrogant rich guy on a plane, and it gets wild." The comments flooded in instantly. "This is unreal." Victor is the type of guy who yells at waiters for no reason. Keanu is the only celebrity I trust. Somebody throw Victor out the emergency exit. Lily swallowed a smile. The internet was already taking sides. Then, a voice, sharp and venomous, sliced through the tension. This is your fault. All heads turned. Victor was staring straight at Keanu, his face red with barely contained rage. You think you're some untouchable hero? His voice rose, his control slipping. You humiliated me in front of everyone. You put her, he jabbed a finger toward Jessica, in an impossible situation. And now this turbulence? This is karma, Reeves. Keanu's jaw tensed. You're blaming me for the weather now? Victor leaned forward, his eyes glinting with something dark. I'm blaming you for everything. Jessica shifted uncomfortably. Sir, please, let's just... Shut up, Victor snapped at her. That was a mistake. The second the words left his mouth, Keanu moved. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't even stand. But the look he gave Victor was enough to turn the air to ice. Apologize? Victor scoffed. Or what? Keanu leaned in slightly. Or you'll see just how little your money matters right now. The entire cabin was silent. Jessica, her face flushed with both embarrassment and frustration, finally turned toward Victor. Her voice, though shaky, held steel beneath it. Sir, if you continue to harass passengers, I'll have no choice but to alert security when we land. Victor's jaw clenched. He looked at Jessica, then at Keanu, then at the passengers watching him like he was an animal trapped in a cage. For the first time, he had no control, and he hated it. The plane rocked again, but this time, Victor wasn't the only one rattled. Because outside, in the storm-darkened sky, something was happening. The turbulence wasn't normal, something was wrong, and they were about to find out exactly what. The cabin lights flickered again. This time, they didn't just dim, they cut out completely for a few seconds before the emergency backups kicked in with a dull glow. A few passengers gasped. The nervous woman in the back clutched her armrest tighter, her breathing ragged. Victor, for all his bravado, glanced toward the windows, his smugness flickering with the first hint of real concern. Then the intercom crackled to life. But this time, the captain's voice wasn't calm. Calm. It was tight, controlled, but carrying an edge of urgency. Ladies and gentlemen, we're experiencing an unexpected technical issue. Please remain seated and fasten your seat belts. Flight crew, prepare for... The transmission cut off mid-sentence. A split-second pause. Then, the plane lurched, hard. Passengers jolted forward as oxygen masks dropped from the overhead compartments. Someone screamed. The girl with the phone, Lily, let out a sharp breath, her camera shaking as she tried to capture the chaos. Keanu immediately braced himself, one arm going around his mother protectively. Patricia gripped his hand tightly, her knuckles white. Keanu. I'm here, he murmured, his voice steady despite the chaos. Victor, now visibly rattled, grabbed his armrest. What the hell is going on? Jessica, already pale, looked around wildly, clutching her radio. Why did the captain's transmission cut out? A few passengers were hyperventilating. Someone in economy was crying. The first-class cabin was no longer divided by money or status, just fear. Keanu exhaled, his mind sharp, despite the panic around him. Something wasn't adding up. This wasn't just turbulence. Then, a new voice crackled over the intercom. A voice that didn't belong to the captain. This is Special Agent Laura Hensley, Federal Aviation Administration. All passengers remain seated. No one moves. The voice was female, calm but authoritative. The kind of voice that didn't ask. It commanded. Jessica's mouth parted in shock. She whispered. Victor's face drained of color. Keanu's grip on his mother's hand tightened. Then, just as the weight of those words settled over the cabin doors burst open. A team of federal agents stormed inside. Weapons holstered, but hands on their belts, they moved with precision, their eyes scanning the cabin like hunters locking on to prey. And then Agent Hensley, a woman in a sharp suit and an expression of iron control, strode forward, holding up a tablet displaying security footage. Her sharp gaze landed on one person first, Keanu Reeves. Mr. Reeves, Victor Marshall, and Richard Cole. Her eyes flickered to the airline executive who had remained quiet until now. You are all under federal investigation for events that have directly compromised this flight's safety. Gasps. More confusion. Patricia let out a strangled whisper. Keanu? Keanu's jaw tightened. This is a mistake. But Hensley wasn't looking at him anymore. She turned the tablet around, revealing grainy black and white footage from the cockpit and a timeline of exactly when things had gone wrong. A disturbance in first class. Shouting. A power struggle. The captain distracted. Then a tray knocked loose during the argument, jamming a critical control panel. Keanu's stomach dropped. Victor shot to his feet, his face red with fury. Oh, come on! You're blaming us for this? Agent Hensley barely blinked. I'm not blaming anyone yet, but until we land, you're all coming with us for questioning. Victor cursed under his breath. But Keanu? Keanu just exhaled slowly, because he knew one thing for sure. This wasn't just about him anymore. Something much bigger was happening, and none of them were getting off this plane without the truth coming out. The plane descended through the storm, the engines roaring. As the lights flickered again, the tension inside first class was thick, unbreakable, like the moment before an explosion. Keanu sat perfectly still, his hands resting on his knees, his face unreadable. Patricia clutched his arm, her grip trembling, but he gave her a small, reassuring squeeze. It's okay, Mom, he murmured. I'll handle it. Agent Laura Hensley stood firm, her expression unreadable as she watched the passengers. Her team remained positioned at key points in the cabin, their hands near their holstered weapons, not drawn, but close enough to be a warning. Victor, still fuming, spat, "This is insane. You're detaining us for a spilled drink and some turbulence. I should sue this whole damn airline." Hensley barely gave him a glance. "You're not being detained, Mr. Marshall. You're being taken in for questioning due to an ongoing federal investigation." Victor scoffed. "Investigation? Into what?" Agent Hensley's eyes flickered toward Keanu. "Into whether the events on this plane were just an accident." A sharp silence followed. Keanu held her gaze, calm but calculating. "You think someone sabotaged the flight?" Hensley didn't answer immediately, which was an answer in itself. Jessica, still gripping her clipboard like it was a lifeline, looked between them, her pulse visibly racing. The weight of what was happening was dawning on her in real time. Then, the plane jolted. A rough, uneven shake rattled the entire aircraft. A few passengers gasped as the oxygen masks still dangling from above swayed eerily. The intercom crackled again. The captain's voice came through, this time laced with clear tension. "This is your captain speaking. We are preparing for an emergency landing at O'Hare International. Please brace for impact. Flight crew, take your positions." Keanu exhaled slowly. Patricia reached for his hand again, whispering, "Keanu?" "I know, love," he said quietly. Victor, pale now, wasn't talking anymore. He just gripped his armrests with white-knuckled hands. Lily, the girl who had been filming everything, was still recording, her phone pointed at Keanu, at the agents, at the panic in the cabin. Her live stream was blowing up. 60,000 viewers, 70,000, 100,000. The world was watching. Keanu glanced at the screen briefly, then looked at Hensley. "You sure you want to arrest me on a live stream?" Hensley's jaw tightened, but she didn't respond. Then finally, the wheels hit the ground. The impact was rough. Passengers jolted forward, some crying out as the plane skidded along the slick tarmac. The world outside was a blur of flashing lights, emergency vehicles, airport security, and more federal agents waiting on the ground. Then, as the plane finally came to a halt, the cabin doors burst open once more. Armed agents swarmed inside. Patricia let out a small gasp, holding on to Keanu. "No," she whispered. "No, this isn't right." Keanu remained still, his expression unreadable, as Agent Hensley nodded to her men. "Take them!" Victor immediately shouted in protest as two agents grabbed him by the arms. Richard Cole, the silent executive who had watched everything unfold, stood without a fight. But the look in his eyes said he knew something. And then they turned to Keanu. Patricia clutched his arm tighter. "Please," she pleaded. "He didn't do anything." Keanu, still calm, looked at the agents. Then he stood slowly, without resistance. He turned to his mother and placed a gentle hand on hers. "I'll be fine, Mom," he said softly. "Trust me." Then, as the world outside erupted in camera flashes and chaos, Keanu Reeves was led off the plane in handcuffs. Lily's live stream flashed with new comments. "Keanu arrested? What is happening? No way this is real. Somebody find out what they're charging him with. This is a setup." But as Keanu stepped off the plane, his mind wasn't on the cameras. It was on one thing. If this was sabotage, then someone wanted this plane to go down, and he was going to find out who.